Welcome to the Busy Bariatrics podcast. I'm your host, Rob DiMedio, certified fitness and nutrition coach, bariatric surgery advocate, and your go-to guy for salty accountability with a punch of humor. Let's get busy and I'll show you how to optimize your post-surgery journey and turn it into a lifestyle of strength, health, and balance. Wow, that is a lot of an opening. So you made it to episode 1. Congratulations. I have no idea how you got here. So if there's a way that you could message me or tell me how you found the podcast, if you like this podcast, even though we're only 20 seconds into the podcast, all that feedback would be absolutely amazing to help me figure out what I'm doing here. This is episode 1 of the Busy Bariatric podcast. I'm Rob DiMedio and I had bariatric surgery in June of 2020. I've been on multiple podcasts as well as award shows, as well as hosted award shows and throughout the bariatric community for the last 4 years. After being the guest and guest host on about 24 podcasts, I finally answered the question of, sure, why not have my own, as I also run a coaching company, and this could be a really good example of how to just really talk in depth and also explain everything that I know about bariatrics. What sort of training or certifications do I have as a bariatric coach? Well, I'm a certified personal trainer and a nutrition coach. And I have been working with bariatric clients now for 2 years. During that time, I've really learned how to develop plans and things that help coaches and clients thrive after bariatric surgery. And in my own personal experience, I've spent 4 years really immersing myself in the knowledge, the research, and the practice of how to lose weight after bariatric surgery, how to build the right mindset around it, and how to do everything else. I figured for our first episode, we kind of have to have an origin story. Although I also kind of feel like Spider-Man, if I'm being 100% honest. You can go to almost any bariatric podcast and look through their episodes and find my episode. And I feel like I've told my origin story so many times that even in the later episodes, I actually make this random joke of that I was bitten by a radioactive spider, and then I start telling the story. So, anywho, that's who I am. This is what I'm doing. Really, at the end of the day, I'm too long-winded for social media. I can't really be fit into characters. And every time I seem to post, I seem to get more feedback of, well, there's nuances to this. And I kind of want to take this time to explain the nuances. Either way, this is going to be just my takes on the bariatric community as well as what helps bariatric patients thrive. And I'll probably have some guests on of people who I probably owe to have on at this point, seeing as how I've had them on or I've been on their shows. I'm also probably not going to edit out a lot of my flips and blurbs and everything. So let's just be ready for you're going to get the raw, unedited version most weeks. On top of that, if you're looking on YouTube, you're going to notice I'm keep going to this. I wrote out notes. As a teacher, I kind of like to be prepared and I wanted to be able to hit everything. And there's nothing I hate more than when I talk on a subject and then I get done and then I realize oh, I didn't talk about this. So it's kind of in poor taste, I guess, if you're a comedian to have your notepad up. But I'm going to fully lean into that idea and just really share what I wrote down on my thoughts and kind of get it out for us. So with that, who am I? Was I always fat? And where does this origin story start? Well, growing up, I came from a really amazing childhood. I grew up in a small little suburb outside of Philadelphia on the Jersey side. So I am that type of person who, if you ask me where I'm from, I say Philly because it's 100 times easier than explaining I was born and raised in Cherry Hill and I moved one town over. I went to school in Philadelphia and got a job in Philly Public right after that. And then I got married, moved back across the bridge, and moved one town over. And in the true New Jersey dream, I'll probably die in that town. Now that we've covered kind of the grand scheme, let's go all the way back to what really made me me. Like I said, growing up in my childhood, I really did have a really good childhood. I grew up in a family where food was a main focal point. It was a social point. Growing up in an Italian household, we used food for everything. We would use it to celebrate. We would use it to mourn if something did well. We would go out and eat if something went wrong. We would go out and commiserate and eat. If it was just a random day and we were tired, we would probably go to our local Italian restaurant and have dinner there if someone wasn't willing to cook, aka my mom. I have two really good parents. They've always loved and cared for me. It's not one of those where I had any sort of trauma in childhood, other than the fact that, like, I was a chubby kid. I've always loved food from a very small age, and my family was fine with feeding me. I would have full three-course dinners on a Tuesday as a child where we would have our salad, then we would have pasta, and then we'd have fruit, and then we'd have dessert. So technically, I guess four courses growing up. But my mom was a really good cook. It was a balance of healthy as opposed to like what we needed to eat on a weeknight. We didn't really have a lot of fast food. Like it wasn't taboo in our household. But I also wasn't raised on McDonald's. It was definitely a treat. We'd get a Happy Meal occasionally as a child, and that was kind of like a cool deal. But for the most part, we had meals fed and prepared for us. We had an abundance of snacks in our house, both healthy and somewhat unhealthy if they were on sale. And that was kind of like my food eating pattern as a child. And I was a big kid because I liked to eat and I would constantly eat. Um, and that's really how my childhood went. As I went to the doctor, my pediatrician, who I had all the way up until I was 20. So, yeah, my pediatrician I had for a 20-year career would just do the typical BMI thing of like, look, here's where like an average kid is, and you are kind of way up there. And he would do a lot of the things that I think pediatricians recommended um, for kids in the late 80s, early 90s to give you an idea of how old I was. I was never called fat. I was told I was overweight because technically and medically I was overweight. My doctor would be very much clear of like, are you eating fruits and vegetables? I'm like, oh, absolutely. I have it before dinner and after dessert. And he'd be like, well, maybe less of the dinner and dessert and a little bit more fruits and vegetables. But there was like no shaming. I would feel guilt though because it wasn't that age where you would do heights and weights where they would call every kid down to the office and you would stand into a line and I was always the heaviest kid. So there would always be some snickers when the nurse would call out the number. Because there was always the nurse who was weighing and then another one recording because I was old enough it was all pad and paper. So it would literally be like DiMedio, 85 pounds, and you'd hear like a couple chuckles in kindergarten because that's a heavy weight for that. And I remember DiMedio, 85 pounds, but for the most part I had a good childhood. Kids would kind of pick on me because I was a chunky kid, but I had a good group of friends who never really judged me for my size. I was a terrible athlete because most sports for kids that young revolved around running. So I was really bad at soccer because I didn't like that. I did not have the coordination for baseball, so that was kind of out. We didn't really have a football program growing up, which I think I probably would have gotten into, but it wasn't around in our town that much, and I think it was on the opposite end of town, and my mom had to get two other kids around, so that didn't really work for it. Really, the best story I can tell you of my childhood was I think it was after one of the pediatrician ones where it was like my fifth consecutive year of like your child is overweight. My mom and dad were like, okay, we're going to really limit and reduce unhealthy snacks. And we really didn't have like chips or cookies growing up. We'd get them on rare occasion, usually when there was a sale. But for the most part, we ate very healthily. But we kind of made a deal of the kitchen would be closed at 8 o'clock and that we would not snack between meals and we would go to more of like a 4 meal plan. So I would have like my breakfast before activities, then we would have lunch, then we would have something around like 4, and then we would eat around 7. So kind of 4 meals a day was the approach with a moderate snack. Everything else would be locked in. Well, I kind of wanted to eat more than that. So one of the things that I did was I grabbed a bagel thinking that I was home alone, and I heard the garage door start to open into our house. So I could make a mad dash from there, either upstairs or into the downstairs bathroom. So I had a bagel in hand and I heard the garage door and I bolted into the bathroom. I go into the bathroom and I'm literally like a squirrel. I am eating a bagel over the toilet seat and I can hear my parents come in and it's like this weird horror movie of I'm trying to eat it as quickly as possible so that there's no proof. And I can hear my parents clunging around and I hear my dad bang on the door. Bam, bam, bam. What are you doing in the toilet? And I froze and freaked out and I opened my hands in pure fear and the bagel dropped in the toilet. This was a critical part of my childhood. And I say this because as the bagel was in the toilet, I really had to figure out, what am I going to do with this bagel? Can I flush it down the toilet, which I was pretty sure wouldn't work, or was I going to pick it up? So by process, I was like, well, if I pick it up, then I have to throw it out. And when I looked, there was already like tissue and wet stuff in the trash can. I'm like, well, if I pick it up and throw it out, they're still going to ask why I'm taking out the trash in the bathroom. So let me try to flush this thing. Long story short, I flush a bagel down the toilet and I think I get away with it. I'm in like fifth grade at this point, you know, that age where you're convinced that you can do something this dumb and get away with it. I go back to playing upstairs, doing whatever, maybe reading to try to look intelligent. And my dad comes up and goes, Rob, the toilet doesn't work. I go, oh, interesting. Wonder what happened there. He's like, you were the only one home today. Why is the toilet not working? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Maybe the plumbing's backed up. Why would the plumbing be backed up? Couldn't tell you. So my dad goes and he gets a snake because my dad owned his own hardware company. So we always had tool supplies. He gets a plumbing snake, which you kind of put down the tub or the toilet or whatever sink and you shove it in and it pushes usually the item through and it opens up the drain. He goes, he can't get the snake done because there's a bagel that's in there and it has absorbed and completely consumed the entire tank. Comes back upstairs and goes, Rob, can't even get the snake through. What do you think's in the toilet? And I go, yeah, I don't know what's in the toilet. Be interesting to see what it was. My dad goes, I'm going to tell you right now. Is there anything you want to tell me? Because I'm going to have to turn the water off to the house and take the toilet off. At this point, I know I'm dead, but it's like maybe there's still a rare chance that I'll get away or it's something else. So I go, yeah, guess we're going to have to take the toilet off. So then I proceed to help as this father and son project of turning the water off in our house, taking the toilet, bringing it out onto our back deck. Now, keep in mind where we live. When you're on your back deck, you can see your other neighbors' back decks. Like you can kind of have that big open suburb backyard where everyone can see each other's backyards. People are barbecuing, they're out doing yard work, and there is my dad with our downstairs toilet flipped upside down on the patio, and he is digging his hand in through this, and I'm standing there, scared to death, right next to him. He eventually reaches in and he pulls out what's left of this bagel and just screams, "What's this? What's this?" And I go, "A bagel?" And he's like, "How did a bagel get into the toilet?" I bring this story up to kind of share that I had a weird relationship with food. And that was probably the first early warning sign that I really had a love of food that was outright unhealthy and borderline unstable. That's going to play a role because of how much food plays a role throughout everything else I tell you in this podcast. But essentially, the first sign when people say, like, did you ever have an issue with food? And when I went for bariatric surgery and did my psych eval, I didn't fully tell them the bagel story to the level that I just told you. But I promise you, I did answer yes. And they said, did you care to share what happened? And I just said no. I said I understood, I learned from it, but I know I had previous relationships with food because having to tell a stranger for the evaluation to determine if you were going to get weight loss surgery that you ate a bagel over the toilet and then tried to flush it when people found out you were eating bagels over the toilet is probably a sign that you need more help. I'm going to get to that later as well. So anyway, chubby kid, and that was pretty much all the way up till high school. High school, I got really lucky. I had a bigger body and I developed early, so I was kind of built well to play offensive line. And I'm not going to tell you I was a good offensive lineman or a good football player, but I really enjoyed it. It was the first time I really felt that I belonged on a team. I felt there was a position that worked well for a bigger person, and I really did give it my all. So much of high school to me revolved around football because it was a feeling of belonging. It was the first time I really did something hard that was a challenge for me. A lot of the times in other sports growing up, if it got hard, I just kind of quit. Football was the first time that like I had to do 2 practices in a day where I had to hit other people, that I would get banged up and be expected to continue to go. And it was such a character building part of my life that I went on to coach after college because I loved the game, and still to today I love football for everything that it taught me. During that time, we would get to off season and we'd start lifting weights, and I was just enamored. I loved the fact that I was one of the stronger freshmen coming in. As a sophomore, I continued to be one of the stronger kids on the team. And I fell in love with lifting weights. I did winter track, essentially because that was the only way you could get access to a weight room after school, is if you were on a winter sport. So I signed up for track, not because I really liked throwing shot put, and I really hated all the meets, because they're kind of boring for you when you throw shot put. But for me, it was an opportunity where I could finally get into the weight room for 5 days a week, lift as hard as I want, and do whatever I wanted in there. And that's really where I fell in love with the process. I had a really good high school career, but one thing that I started to develop was this idea that if I wanted to get stronger, I had to eat more, but if I wanted to stay in shape, I had to run more. So I started this really cyclical process that was unhealthy, where I would eat a whole bunch of food and I would start to see the scale tip up, and then I would essentially run wind sprints or jog laps or do whatever I thought to take the weight off. That would be during off seasons, and then during the season I didn't really weigh. I don't really remember when I started weighing or making that so much a thing, but I do remember like I would get on the scale every now and then and kind of woof of like, oh, the scale is up again. There's other parts though in my life where I remember in football as a sophomore, one of my coaches was like, if we can just get you to 225, you would be built like a brick S house. And you would be able to probably start varsity. And it's funny being a sophomore and think, man, if I could only get to 225 pounds, my life would be perfect. This was when I was weighing like 205 pounds as a freshman, making me one of the bigger kids. But I was like, if I could just gain 20 pounds. So I would start to eat everything. I would double up my portions. I would get on the scale and I would be like 205 and be like, and kind of get it. But I worked my whole time to get there. And when high school was said and done, I actually won the Wendy's High School Heisman Award for student athlete, which was given for academic excellence and athletic excellence. To show that I was able to do both, this is the dumb thing that I figured I would do. My high school literally was across the street from a Wendy's. And we used to have this lap we would run in football, which was about a half a mile. So I decided to celebrate the Wendy's High School Heisman by completing a grand slam. I bought a bacon cheeseburger, double bacon cheeseburger, triple bacon cheeseburger, and a junior bacon cheeseburger. That's what it was: junior, single, double, triple. And the deal that I did was I ate the triple cheeseburger and then I did this half mile loop lap. And then I ate the double cheeseburger and I did a half mile loop lap. I did the single cheeseburger half mile loop lap. You get the idea. And then I did it with the junior cheeseburger. So I essentially ran 2 miles, but ate like 4,000 calories and thought that was the coolest thing ever that I was able to do that. This really did start to set up this foundation in my head that if I just worked more, I could eat more. That was going to translate as well when I started earning money, with the idea that if I wanted to spend more, I just needed to earn more. It's a pattern that's going to cause me, by the time I'm like mid 30s, to be about 365 pounds and over $250,000 in debt. But a lot of it came from the fact that I got immediate rewards and that there were results that came from it. And for that, I kind of worked. When I got to college, I did not realize how much of a culture shock that would be. My high school football coach made it very clear to us that if you drank, it essentially wiped out like 3 workouts. And I don't know the full science behind it, but I always took that to heart. So I did not drink my freshman, sophomore, and junior year in high school because I really wanted to see if I could play collegiately. I would work my tail off. I wouldn't go to parties. I really did try to focus on being the best student athlete I could be. My senior year, I blew out my shoulder playing football, and my career was essentially over. At that point, I started underage drinking, which I think was very common during that point, and that continued when I went to college. The difference with college, though, was I went from being a 3 sport athlete who would practice for 2 to 3 hours a day after school, as well as we had a campus for high school. So you would have to walk from class to class, as well as take gym class and everything else. And then I would be pretty active on the weekends to going to college where I was sitting in classes, coming back to my room, playing Madden or video games with my friends, and then drinking heavily more nights than not. I developed the freshman 15 my first year, and I continued to gain the freshman 15 every single year so that by the time I graduated, I was about 250, 260, to give you an idea. The diet that I lived on during college wasn't that healthy either because to kind of cut weight, what I would do is I would just stop eating and I would have two Bud Lights a day or two Slim Fast a day, one for breakfast after my morning classes, one like midday afternoon, and then I would start drinking when I would go out all night, and then I would eat like a late night meal. And because I hovered between like 5 to 10 pounds, I actually thought that was an okay way to operate, not realizing that I was not getting the proper nutrition that I needed. And I was seriously taking on weight while losing muscle at the same time. When I graduated from high school, I kind of went on and started a routine where I would eat two lean cuisines, a Wawa like egg and cheese sandwich, which is a local gas station near us for breakfast, and then a lean cuisine for lunch and dinner, while still kind of drinking a lot on the weekend and working two jobs. That kind of went to married life where I somehow managed to live on that lifestyle and get back down to 215. And then I got engaged to my wife, who I'm still married with today. I may be the only person in the history of getting married to gain significant weight from their engagement to their wedding. I was engaged at 215 pounds. That was probably the leanest I looked. I was going to spin class like 5 days a week. I was living on those two lean cuisines and drinking all weekend and then occasionally binge eating to kind of cover the rest of it. But I was at 210, 215 and feeling my best, or looking my best, but feeling my worst. When I got engaged and we bought a house and moved in together with Kate, we started eating like 3 meals a day, packing lunch and doing everything while I was still eating, dining out, and enjoying the relationship. I got up to 290 pounds in 18 months. So I literally gained 75 pounds from when I got engaged until I got married. That is a lot of weight for 18 months. Literally, friends and family who had saw me could not believe it in the worst way possible that that's what I looked like on my wedding day. And to be really fair to myself, I was not in the best shape. Looking at it, we went on our honeymoon, and an experience that I did not realize is we went snorkeling, and I didn't realize how big I had gotten. But we had gone out on these mini boats, and when I went to get back into the boat, I did not have the upper body strength to pull myself into the boat and almost rock the boat over, to the fact that two of the guides had to come over from another group to help push me into the boat to get me back in. You would think that that would be the sign that I should probably stop eating at 290 pounds. But unfortunately, I always kind of looked at things as this is just funny. And it was comical. It was a great story to tell when I went home. And using that as a story kind of laid into the fact of like, I was kind of like just the funny fat friend who did all this. We eventually had kids. And during Kate's first pregnancy, we were eating, and I was essentially dining for two. She couldn't really eat a lot of food because of everything that was going on. So I would always eat her leftovers and joke that, like, we're eating for two now. And I was really eating more than Kate. So I eventually got to about 290 to about 310, another 20 pounds when Allie, our first child, was born. And that really got me to where I realized I needed to make a change. My doctor was always really good in understanding that my obesity was going to be an issue, and he prescribed an injectable for me that was called Quixnia. Quixnia, right now, I'm not sure if it's still on the market, but it is an amphetamine that pretty much like gets your energy going and reduces your appetite, and caused me to pretty much run around like a nut. That got me down to 270 pounds, though, and kind of took 40 pounds off so that I could go back to operating. During that point, though, my wife noticed when I would go to bed that I was snoring heavily and realized that I needed a CPAP machine. When we did the initial CPAP studies, it was found that I was snoring and waking up enough that I needed the CPAP machine, which essentially looks like a giant mask you put on. It allows air to force itself into your airways so that you don't asphyxiate during your sleep. As I got bigger, though, I put more and more strain on the CPAP machine. That was going to cause issue because eventually my throat was not going to be able to breathe at night, and it was collapsing in on itself to the point that I was waking up over 72 times an hour, meaning that I would wake up more than once a minute from my sleep pattern. This would leave me feeling exhausted, unrefreshed, absolutely beaten up every morning when I would wake up. And when you do not get good sleep, it increases hunger cues from ghrelin and leptin, which makes you hungrier during the day. So I would wake up tired, hungry, and start the process all over again. Essentially, this would get me all the way up to 365 pounds. While I was still working as a career as a teacher, I then went into administration, and I was involved in two incidents at one of my jobs that involved guns that left me with post-traumatic stress disorder. I did not, I'm trying to think how best to put this. I struggled with the idea around mental health until it severely affected me. Sometime after the second gun incident. Sorry, I struggle even talking with this today. Sometime around the second gun incident, I started to notice that my hands would just shake uncontrollably. If a balloon popped or something startling sounded, I would almost go into an anxiety attack. I was overly anxious and tiredly strung out at work to the fact that just getting to Thursday every week seemed to be like a win, enough that I would drink heavily to kind of get the shaking to go down, go to bed, and relax a little bit more. I eventually had to leave that job because I just mentally and emotionally could not handle the stress. And I went into administration on the Jersey side and had a really good career that I was happy with. The stress of those jobs, though, continued with me emotionally eating and me not addressing my alcohol consumption. And on an average NFL Sunday, when I got to my highest weight, I could be about 6,000 calories in by the time the Eagles were done playing. This was a combination of breakfast foods, lunch, dinner, all the other things that kind of hit, and all the results that it got. By the time all of this continued to happen, I had finally hit 365 pounds. The summer of 2019, I actually landed my dream job teaching in my hometown and just teaching history. I wouldn't have to be a dean. I wouldn't have to stay late if I didn't want to. I wouldn't have to come in early. I could just get back to the reason I wanted to get into education, and that was to teach kids. At that time, I went for my pulmonology appointment, and they pretty much told me I was burning out my CPAP machine. Because I was burning out my CPAP machine, they couldn't comfortably tell me that the machine could keep me alive during the night. My answer to everything has always been, well, I'll just get the next size up. And my pulmonologist had to make it very clear that this is the biggest size CPAP that we have, and that at this point, there is a chance that you could die in your sleep. I assumed that that meant like in my 50s or 60s. I was not ready for when he said, I don't know if you're going to make it to 40 if you continue to gain weight and eat and drink the way that you do. I realized that I had spent the last 12 years of my life trying to get to this point, and I was going to lose it all because of my drinking and my inability to deal with issues. I started attending therapy regularly. I went back to my primary care physician. I asked him for some advice of what I could do, and he said to me, I actually recommended bariatric surgery for you 2 years ago, and you left the referral slip in the office. I kept it in your file. And he still had the form that was for bariatric surgery. I then said I was ready to hear that message and asked if we could go over it again. He explained then what he said he explained 2 years ago, which was that I should be going to Penn Medicine, which in our area had a really good track record, and that this would be probably my best chance, but you'd have to apply for surgery. I didn't really understand what apply for surgery meant, and he had to explain to me that you're going to have to go through medical tests. You're going to have to show a record that you've tried diet and exercise. You're going to have to try to show that you've learned about your eating and patterns. And it was so important to me that I wanted to make sure that I didn't mess this one up. So I proceeded to then go over to Penn and do everything in my power to make sure that I did everything right. I met through the entire program, and that'll probably be its own pre episode that we'll do. But I essentially learned some things that I had never learned before: how to track my food, how to start getting a step goal, how to start drinking water on a consistent basis. Basic behavior goals that Penn taught me helped me to lose my first 50 pounds. And I actually went into my weight loss surgery at 315 after being 365 pounds. So I essentially lost from October of 2019 to June 50 pounds, which was a pretty impressive feat to the fact that many people ask me, like, well, if you're losing the weight now, why don't you just continue to lose it naturally? And I was so afraid that I'd mess it up because I had a pattern of gaining and losing the weight before that I didn't want to do this again. I really did commit that because bariatric surgery was life saving, that I would make it life changing. And it started with those habits and patterns. The original surgery date they gave for me was March of 2020. For those of you scoring at home, that meant that I was supposed to get surgery, and literally the world shut down. So we went to look at other dates, and they told me, look, we don't know when surgery is going to be available. You just kind of have to stay in a hold pattern. During the pandemic, because my wife was a nurse, she would be working in the hospital multiple shifts at a time, and I would be home with our two kids, raising them, getting their education together, teaching online, and trying to cook healthy. I took it as a true blessing because I really had to monitor and track out every single meal that I had and make sure that we could use everything with the budget that we had available. I also, during that time, started hitting 15,000 steps a day, culminating in the fact that I did 213 days in a row after bariatric surgery, and then I missed a day. I then went on and got another 400 plus days of 15,000 steps to go through, and that's really how I lost the bulk of my weight after weight loss surgery. The 15,000 steps a day after weight loss surgery got me down to about 213, and that was pretty awesome. Is that I got to like 213, 210 pounds, all from just walking, getting steps, and a couple of Peloton classes here and there. The only problem was I felt like I was living on the hamster wheel where I'd have to get 15,000 steps a day. I would end up doing like 3 or 4 Peloton classes. I would then try to do dumbbell workouts. I would then try to do high intensity interval training. And it seemed no matter what I wanted to do, I just couldn't get the numbers to work to feel better. And I started this where I was just living in this hamster wheel of maintenance. Moving forward, it was one of those that my story started to get shared. I would be on podcasts and start to share elsewhere with my story on Instagram, and my little following started to grow throughout this entire time. This would culminate in our Sleeve Life podcast having their first Just Be You Awards, where I was nominated for like 6 categories. And I kind of asked my wife if I could go. It was in Portland, Oregon. We didn't really have the money at the time, but we kind of scraped enough together to ship me out. And I ended up winning Best Men's Fitness and Best Men's Account, which was a complete and total shock to me. And from there, it really started a whirlwind year where I got invited to be a national speaker, and I started traveling across the country sharing my story of bariatric surgery. I was invited to do live podcast episodes that we sold out in my hometown. I also shot a pilot with my hero, Dr. Connie Stapleton, who literally wrote the book on weight loss surgery. I really did live a fairy tale life while this was going on, while also opening up my own coaching business to help others get their lives together. Since then, I've also had the opportunity to host the JBY Awards afterwards, as well as be a speaker at Bariatric Retreat. And I even host my own summer camp speaker series where I bring in some of the most monumental voices to me. I've also realized I've probably been talking too much for this, so I'm going to end episode 1. If you feel like you liked it or you have feedback for me, please, please, please leave a review. If you feel like I've earned it, please leave a 5-star rating and review, and you will be entered into our free weekly drawing. If you want more chances to win or just want to hear more of my story and get a feel for me, you can sign up for my email list, and that'll be found in the show notes below. As always, thanks for listening and keep getting busy.